Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping into a topic that, well, it's captured the imagination of a lot of people, from reality TV producers all the way to historians. We're talking about the culture of large-scale, family-level preparedness, often associated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right.
You've definitely heard the phrase, those whispers of Mormon doomsday storage.
Oh, yeah.
It brings up these images of huge basements full of dried goods, maybe even grain silos.
Right, these massive operations.
So the question is, what's the actual reality behind the 20-year shelf life staples, this goal of self-sufficiency and all those persistent rumors?
And that's our mission today.
Exactly. We've gone through a stack of sources really dissecting the official guidance, the historical context, and how this unique culture of self-reliance is applied today. We're going to define what the official policy truly is.
Correct.
We'll trace its roots from, frontier survival all the way to the Cold War and see what members are actually doing right now.
And I think that difference between the official doctrine and the exaggeration, that is absolutely key.
Right.
We really need to frame this not as some, niche prepple movement, but as a practical, institutionalized philosophy. The official advice is all about preparedness and self-reliance.
So what does that actually mean in practice?
It means having reasonable food, water, and financial reserves to get through standard life events. Things like losing a job or maybe a regional power outage. It's not just about some global catastrophe.
Okay, so let's unpack that official doctrine first, because this is really where the popular myths start to separate, and pretty sharply from the facts.
They really do.
If you look at the standard step-by-step approach recommended by the church leadership, it's very measured. It's gradual.
It's designed to be accessible.
It is. It starts with the first phase, which is advised for every single family. Build a 3-month supply of foods that you and your family regularly consume.
And that's a critical point. Foods you actually eat.
Yeah, this is all about immediate practical resilience. You can live off it right now, and you're rotating it constantly.
That rotation is so crucial. It makes sure the food doesn't go bad, and it also means the family is eating familiar meals during a crisis, which is a huge comfort.
Right. So once that 3-month goal is stable, then phase 2 begins.
And this is where the long-term thinking comes in. Gradually accumulating a supply of basic staples, things chosen for their longevity, their caloric density, and, their cost effectiveness.
Which means we're talking about the classics.
The absolute classic.
Wheat, white rice, dried beans, pasta, potatoes, and shelf-stable canned goods. Food that, calorie for calorie, gives you the best return on investment for long-term storage.
Exactly. And the official advice, it always defines a clear end goal for this extended preparation. Now, we've all heard rumors of these multi-decade stashes.
Oh, for sure.
But what is the documented official maximum goal in church literature? It is consistently stated as a 1-year supply of basic necessities. That is the standard marker the organization encourages its members to aim for.
A 1-year supply. I mean, that immediately refutes the more outlandish claims that every member is stockpiling for, 7, 10, or 15 years?
It does. You hear that all the time in popular culture.
Yeah.
The official line is just far more modest and actionable.
And it comes with a pretty big warning, too.
A very significant practical caveat. Church leaders consistently and very strongly advise members not to go to extremes.
Okay.
And, maybe most importantly, not to incur debt to build their storage.
So no maxing out the credit cards for buckets of wheat.
Absolutely not. This emphasizes that sustainable preparation living within your means while you prepare is way more important than hitting some arbitrary massive number driven by fear.
That shift from debt-ridden hoarding to sustainable inventory is, it's profound. It repositions the whole idea as a financial and spiritual principle, not just a reaction to some imminent collapse. But to really get the intensity of the culture that grew up around this, we have to look back. I mean, why did this tradition even start in the first place?
You have to remember the history is rooted in literal, immediate necessity.
Okay.
When the early pioneers were settling the American West, they were completely isolated. Leaders like Brigham Young advised every family to keep a year's worth of food, fuel, seeds, and supplies.
And this wasn't for a Cold War scenario.
No, not at all. This was a matter of life and death. It was about unpredictable harvests, long winters, and the sheer challenge of getting supplies across thousands of miles.
That is a completely different context. It was less of a recommendation and more of a basic survival contract.
It was, and it tied into that foundational philosophy. self-sufficiency, but also the ability to contribute to the community if the group faced a collective famine.
Then the sources show us the concept. It expanded and it sort of mutated in the 20th century,
Mm.
especially with the shadow of global conflicts hanging over everything.
Absolutely. The uncertainty of the Cold War era, I mean, the very real threat of nuclear war, severe economic crises, large-scale natural disasters, it reinvigorated this doctrine.
And the shopping list got longer.
It did. The storage list expanded beyond simple frontier staples. It started to include medical supplies, long-life dehydrated goods like powdered milk, specific fuels, and critically, a focus on financial reserves.
So the scope shifted from surviving the frontier to surviving a major geopolitical or uh, modern economic shock.
Precisely.
And this brings us to the key technical detail that really allows some members to push beyond that official one-year goal and kind of fuels the whole doomsday narrative.
Right.
The science of long-term food preservation. I mean, if the church is recommending a one-year supply, why is the food packaged to last for multiple decades?
This is where it gets really interesting and specific. The church maintains facilities that package certain dry staples like wheat, dried beans, rice, dehydrated potato flakes in a way that just drastically extends their shelf life.
How do they do that?
They advise using techniques like thick mylar bags or heavy-duty food-grade plastic buckets, and they combine that with oxygen absorbers to essentially create a vacuum and eliminate insects. They also stress strict control of temperature and light.
So it's not just about tossing a bag of beans in the corner. You're actively controlling the environment to eliminate the two biggest killers of shelf life, oxygen and moisture.
Exactly. And if these specific long-term staples are stored correctly in this manner, the church states they can last an astonishing 20 to 30 years.
Wow. 20 to 30 years.
That's a huge window.
That massive shelf life has to be the true structural engine behind the doomsday storage myth.
It is.
The official advice is 1 year, but the tools and the technology the church helps provide, they enable and allow for these decade-long individual preparation efforts.
That's the perfect way to put it. The doctrine is modest and practical. The technology facilitates personal extremes.
Okay, so let's try to verify this culture against documented facts versus, what we hear on internet forums and in urban legends.
Let's do it.
The facts are pretty clear. The church officially mandates basic food, water, and financial storage. And we know that many members comply, at least at a basic level.
Right.
The Pew Research Center did a key survey back in 2011, which found that a full 82% of Latter-day Saints in the U.S. reported having at least a 3-month food supply.
That statistic is so significant. Think about that number, 82%. In the general U.S. population, compliance with basic disaster prep recommendations is much, much lower.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
It shows that the 3-month foundation isn't just accepted, it's deeply ingrained. It's widely implemented as standard practice across the culture. It really normalizes preparation.
It suggests that for most of them, this isn't some radical choice. It's just part of household budgeting and planning, like having insurance or a savings account.
Exactly. And this culture is historically continuous, too. It connects directly back to the practical foodways of the Utah pioneers' preservation, drying fruit, large-scale winter storage. It is baked into the cultural DNA.
Okay, so now for the exaggerations.
Right. Given that 82% compliance on the entry-level goal, the claim that everyone has a massive 15-year supply is clearly unsubstantiated. It's a generalization based on the highly visible, very dedicated outliers.
And what about the folklore? The really exciting, dramatic stuff we read about, these vast underground bunkers or secret storage tunnels for whole congregations.
Yeah, our sources indicate that those large-scale collective projects, the kind of thing that makes for great fiction, are generally not publicly documented.
Not by any reliable sources, you mean?
Not by government reports, not by regulatory agencies. They exist largely as folklore, city legends, or are confined to specific niche online discussions.
So if the official practical requirement is 1 year and the real consensus is that 3-month supply, then why are there still so many families aiming for those 7, 10, or even 15-year goals? What's driving that extended ambition?
This is where we move fully into personal strategy, and it's often driven by anxiety and deeply held personal beliefs about the future. The motivations for those extended goals usually revolve around a higher level of fear about critical disaster scenarios. Fear of sustained global conflict, a true systemic economic collapse, a permanent failure of supply chains.
They're preparing for a long-tail event, something where social and governmental structures just fail completely.
Yes, exactly. And there's definitely a connection to certain strains of theological belief, isn't there? The sources highlight that this heightened concern in specific community corners is often tied to strong apocalyptic or millenarian expectations.
Which would naturally fuel a more aggressive and long-term preparation strategy.
It would. And we see these behaviors spike dramatically during periods of acute global uncertainty. The 2008 financial crisis saw a huge jump in interest.
And I'm guessing the 2020 pandemic.
Absolutely. The COVID-19 pandemic caused a widespread review of personal readiness, and not just among Latter-day Saints, but globally.
It sounds like for many, preparation is a constantly moving target, one that's influenced by the daily news cycle.
It can be.
And given that intensity, we have seen a noticeable shift in the official tone since the early 2000s, moving toward much milder, more pragmatic advice.
Very much so.
Official documents today consistently emphasize that milder, step-by-step approach start with 3 months, then tackle long-term, while explicitly and repeatedly warning against excess and debt.
Right. The modern emphasis is on practical accessibility for everyone, regardless of their housing situation or their income level.
Which is crucial for members living in, say, dense urban areas where you don't have a basement or a pantry big enough for a literal one-year supply of wheat.
Exactly. For many non-rural members, the traditional large-scale storage culture has adapted. Sometimes it simplifies down to just relying on a solid 72-hour emergency kit and strong financial savings. It's an acknowledgement of the constraints of modern city living.
It's the difference between self-sufficiency on the frontier and urban resilience in a high-rise.
Perfectly put. And we do have to address the external criticism impartially. Some observers, and this includes some former members, suggest that when this practice transitions from the recommended one-year supply to a multi-year stash, it starts to merge too closely with general prepper culture.
Based on fears that might be seen as unrealistic or excessive by outside standards.
That's the criticism, yes.
And that really is the central difficult tension here. Where does prudent, institutionally advised preparation end? And where does fear-based hoarding or anxiety-driven extremism begin?
The discussion is really nuanced. The extended 7 or 15-year goals are definitively not official doctrine.
Right.
They are personal strategies. They result from family history, global crisis awareness, and economic anxieties, and they're all made possible by that staggering 20 to 30-year shelf life we talked about.
So the culture provides the tools, but the individual sets the goal.
That's it. So to synthesize this whole deep dive, this culture of preparedness is a complex blend of faith, history, and perceived threat. The official doctrine remains a reasonable, sustainable, and relatively modest goal of a one-year supply designed to handle realistic challenges.
But the underlying historical principle, that need for basic self-sufficiency, is still incredibly relevant today.
I'd say more than ever.
Whether we're dealing with localized flooding, pandemic shortages, or supply chain disruptions, the simple wisdom of having a 3-month reserve of food you actually eat and a solid financial plan that feels globally resonant and practical.
It does.
And this brings us to what I think is the most important insight for you, the listener, regardless of your personal background. Stockpiling does not automatically equal security.
So true.
You can't just buy 1,000 pounds of dry goods and forget about them. That's how you end up with 25-year-old flour that turns into expensive waste.
It's the planning that matters. The difference between simple, sustainable preparation and true prepper culture lies entirely in active management. How crucial are concepts like rotation, planning, and realistic expectation to ensure your stored food remains useful?
Right.
If you don't plan to use it or donate it, it's not preparation, it's just clutter.
So the final thought is this. What steps could you take to plan sustainably, starting with the foods you already eat and working within your budget, without incurring debt, to build a realistic buffer for your family's future? That's a principle worth adopting, long after we wrap up this deep dive.